granniopteryx, granniopteryx. She knows the truth, she's linking every link.
Hello. Yesterday, when I was making a video with Yuri Dashevsky, I was interrupted by the dog who came into the studio and started demanding pets. And I mentioned this to Yuri because my concentration was elsewhere while I was talking to him. And he asked if he could see the dog, and I couldn't manage that because the camera I was using is fixed and the dog was a lot lower down than my face. So I have decided now, because the dog came in while I was preparing to make this video, I decided to fix my phone camera. Am I recording there? Yeah. Fix my phone camera onto the point where the dog is sleeping, and you'll see here there's the edge of the desk, and then down there's the dog. So while I'm talking about some very serious matters that arose out of my conversation with Yuri Dashevsky, I thought you might be at least a little calmed. Oh, he's gone away. Sorry. Well, that's it then. Well, he moved, so I thought he'd gone away, but no, he's just chosen another spot on the floor. So I've moved my phone and now I'm carrying on recording him. He is, of course, sleeping, so you won't get much action there. Right, now, I want to go back to the talk I had with Yuri Dashevsky because he raised an interesting question right at the end. It was a bit of an ambush, and later on, thinking about it, I thought this is really important. And his question was, what are we doing online? And I brought up the matter of the ash experiment, which, as it turns out, was in the 50s and probably arose out of the psychological questions people had about what happened in Nazi Germany just 10 years previously. And Professor Ash did the following experiment. If you didn't watch the video with Yuri, I'll just fill you in quickly on that. He drew 3 lines on a blackboard and got a load of students to collaborate in the myth that one of the lines was taller than the others. And then when another student came in who had not been party to this conspiracy, was asked, are those lines the same or is one of them different? And the the student said, yeah, they're all the same. And everybody piled in on him saying, oh, no, the middle one is taller. In most cases, the victim of this experiment would finally change his or her mind and suddenly perceive that central bar was taller than the other ones. Peer pressure, you see, that was the Ash experiment. And I said to Yuri, the most important thing that we were doing by being online was showing other people that the way they think is not unusual. It's, even though all the mainstream media is telling them that line is taller in the middle, we are saying, no, it's not. And the mainstream media has an agenda to make us perceive various things. And people like Yura and me, our agenda is to say things the way we see them, and then other people can make up their own minds about which one is the more accurate. In my case, the other thing I see myself as being at least a little bit important for is the fact that I can bridge between Western ideas and Middle Eastern ideas, Levantine ideas. MENA, M-E-N-A is how we shorthand for the Middle East. That's Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and even to a certain extent Iran, although that's always been a little bit of an outlier. MENA is the Middle East and North Africa, that is Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, that sort of crescent shape there. Okay, so when I say MENA, you'll know what I mean. What I mean? No, this is serious. Right. Now, I see myself as being able to bridge these because although I have spent a lot of my academic life in English literature and Western culture generally, I started my university career in early Islamic history and Arabic when I started. So I have bridged the two cultures, and I keep on telling people why Islam is so dangerous to the West, because I know the difference between Islam and Christianity. And I'm just going to go through it again because I don't think it can be said often enough. So we'll start with Muhammad. Yura asked, how did Islam spread so quickly? I mean, Egypt was a Christian country. Syria, what is now Iraq, all that area, Lebanon, they were all Christian before Islam started. So, and then within 100 years, Islam had spread all over and even gone into Spain. And the way it did it was by two campaigns. The first one was a campaign of extreme brutality. The sort of brutality that we nowadays can hardly imagine. If you think of what Hamas did to the Israelis in October 2023, it was something like that, but probably worse. So there was this extreme brutality, and coupled with a very wide tolerance. So it went like this. The Muslim army would come to a town, would say, you should accept our rulership, our domination. If you don't, you will be subjected to the sort of brutality that you might have an inkling of if you've gone into the October 23 scenario. But if you do accept our domination, we won't do you any harm. You can carry on your religion, you can carry on your learning, you can live your lives, you just pay your taxes to us, and that's it. If you think of the mafia in New York in the 20s, I think you've got something like the right attitude. You paid protection money to the mafia, they got this income stream, and you got left alone. And furthermore, if somebody else tried to muscle in on you, or somebody tried shoplifting or that sort of thing, you could call on the protection of the mafia. And you could be any religion you were, but so long as you just made your tribute to them, that was fine. And that was the model the Muslims used. So, of course, people just caved. All right, if we try to fight, we are going to suffer. We are going to see our children taken into slavery. We are going to be tortured to death in front of them before they're taken into slavery. On the other hand, if we just give in to them, they'll be quite tolerant to us. So what's the problem? And that is how Islam spread throughout the Middle East and North Africa and even into Spain. Now, that tolerance worked for a couple of 100 years, and then things started to change. I don't know whether it was a philosopher called Al-Ghazali who actually started it, or whether he was riding the crest of the wave, but he came up with a sort of package of anti-scientific... I'll just go back on that. In the 10th and 11th century, Arab countries were coming up with all sorts of scientific inventions and discoveries. There's no doubt about it. A lot of them weren't even Muslim, but they had Arabic names because that was a common thing. In Europe in the Middle Ages, it was the same thing. We talk about Copernicus. He was Polish. His name wasn't Copernicus. That's just the Latinized version of his name. Hang on a minute. I don't even know. I'm going to look that up and cut here while I check it out. Copernicus, his birth name was Mikołaj Kopernik. You see, he was Polish, and that was his name. But when he was producing stuff, scientific stuff, he did it in Latin, and his name was Latinized as well. And that was very common. So that's not particularly difficult to come to grips with when all those scientific discoveries that were made during the early time of Muslim hegemony in North Africa and the Middle East. The people appeared to be all Arabs, but they weren't. They just Arabized their names. Now, so when Al-Ghazali came up with this anti-scientific ideas, it took root in Islam. And from then on, scientific research was, well, not flavour of the month. And within 100 years or so, it had completely stopped. And that's when the Europeans started to take over. Because that early flowering of culture in the Muslim world had come up with enough literature that gave Europe a kickstart. There's no doubt about that. But Islam contained within it the seeds of its own suffocation. Right, so let's get back to Muhammad. People think he's like Jesus. The Muslims have Muhammad and the Christians have Jesus. But there's a complete difference between those two characters. Jesus was a sacrifice whose last words were, "Forgive them for what they were doing to him." Muhammad wasn't a sacrifice. He sacrificed others. His opinion on people who didn't like him, he referred to it as people who waged war on Allah and Allah's messenger, i.e. him. There was a whole list of punishments for them, of which death was the least nasty. So along with a different attitude to their founder, that is, a Christian attitude to Jesus, was of a perfect person who allowed evil to be done to him for the greater good of humanity. Muhammad was a perfect person who did evil to other people for the greater good of humanity. There's quite a difference between those two. And this, you can move this on to the difference between a church and a mosque. A church is consecrated ground. It's holy ground. It's a place of sanctuary, which it's shocking to violate. But a mosque in Islam is nothing like that. It's merely a meeting place. It's a building. It is not a holy building. The only thing holy in there is the Qurans that will be around, the editions, the books, that sort of thing. But the building itself is completely neutral. It's as neutral as as a town hall or something. That is, it has official status as a building, but it has no holy or sacred status in itself. So it's simply a place to meet and pray. And that's because Muhammad said that the whole earth is a place to pray. Now, you've seen all those pictures of Muslims praying in the streets, blocking the streets to pray. Because, as Muhammad said, the whole world, anywhere on the earth, is a place to pray, to be sanctified and to be purified. So when you kneel down in the street and bump your head on the pavement, you are purifying yourself, as well as announcing to the world that Islam should own the world. Right, now, what do I have in my notes here? Yeah, there are, by the way, two real holy sites in Islam. There's the Kaaba, the mosque around the Kaaba, that's holy and sacred. And then there's Muhammad's mosque in Medina. And they keep trying to make the Al-Aqsa mosque in Jerusalem having the same sort of status. But a lot of Muslim scholars know that this really won't wash, and it's not. They're trying very hard to give it that status, but most people know that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was called the Al-Aqsa Mosque after the original Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is in Arabia. I'm not going to go into that, this is too complicated. All right, so you might ask why I'm talking about whether a mosque is sacred or not. Well, it goes like this. We in the West have an idea of the sacredness of a church. And by extension, we have moved this to the idea of the sacredness of other buildings, for instance, hospitals. Do you see the connection? Now, you might remember that when Florence Nightingale started her nursing qualifications, because, until then, nurses were just women who looked after people. Sometimes they were drunken old women like Grace Poole in Jane Eyre, or they were nice people who were trying to do well, but there was no structure for them. Florence Nightingale gave this whole thing a structure, and what did she turn to for her ideas? The church. It was like the nursing was set up like a nunnery. There was a matron, she called it a matron, but it was basically an abbess in charge of a community of nurses. That was the model she chose. So by extension, we have the idea that hospitals are sacred places as well. You don't violate the sanctity of a medical establishment. Well, that doesn't happen in Islam. It's not there. I mean, intellectually, a lot of Muslims might have taken on the idea that hospitals are sacred in a similar way to churches, but that's not the way they actually feel about it. You will see, for instance, in Syria, when they were having a go at the Druze, they went into hospitals and killed patients and doctors in those hospitals. And Iran being at war with Israel now, they've been lobbing bombs, one of which landed on a hospital in East Jerusalem. They didn't care about that. They although they would have raised bloody murder if the Israelis had gone for a hospital, and when the Israelis didn't go for a hospital to make it up, to pretend some sort of outrage, they themselves have no real feeling about hospitals. As I said, for instance, they would invade a hospital in Syria and kill the patients and the doctors. In Iran, it's known now that demonstrators who were wounded during demonstrations and were in hospital, the Islamic regime went into the hospitals and shot the patients in the hospitals. This was of no concern to them. It had no sacred connotations at all. It was simply a place where you could shoot enemies because they were incapacitated. So why not do it? Now, most people like Hamas and those sorts of things, they are canny enough to use the sacred hospital idea when they can construct an accusation against their enemies, principally Israel, to say that they are violating the sacredness of hospitals. So they're canny enough to be able to do that, to play on Western sensibilities that they know are Western sensibilities. But between themselves, they have absolutely no feelings one way or the other about using the opportunity of a hospital to kill more of their enemies. Now, when we hear about hospitals being attacked, we're shocked, but we shouldn't be, because we should realise that our ideas about what is sacred and untouchable are completely opposite in Islam, just completely opposite. So if I often mention my mother, who was a colossally untalented parent, and she did everything wrong, almost everything wrong. And so when I was bringing up my children, I used her as a benchmark. I used to think, when I saw a situation, what would my mother do? And then I'd do the exact opposite. And it seemed to work okay. My kids seem to have turned out okay, and we're still talking to each other, which I had my problems with that with my mother. All right, but that's how the West should regard Islam. Whatever they regard as moral, it's the exact opposite in Islam, in almost every case. Not absolutely every case, we're all human after all. Now, does this mean that I'm saying you should distrust and hate any Muslim you come across? No, because there are many Muslims who understand the problem here with Islam and have sort of reached an accommodation. The problem is you're not entirely sure a lot of the time which is which, but in many cases you are pretty sure. When you find somebody like Raja Miah as against somebody like Mohammed Hijab, you can tell which one has the morality that we understand and which one doesn't. So anyway, there you are. That's my clarification, both on what we are doing here and on how we should think about Islam in our world today. And that is, we should approach it with a certain amount of trepidation. Right, till next time, you can help my channel by subscribing and clicking the notification bell. That's quite important. And by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels and to donation methods are in the description. But the best way you can help is simply by clicking like and notify. Thank you.